This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
Hello and welcome to HealthLink, a program connecting home, community, and healthcare. My name is Merton, and today I am delighted to welcome two guests to the program. Lisa Alguire, who is a public health nurse at Graybruce Public Health, and also Sharon Irwin, who is a community housing manager for Grey County. And they're going to be discussing an absolutely fascinating and certainly new to me topic about home takeovers and the impact on our community. I want to welcome both of you to the program today. This is great that you can be here. And as we mentioned just before we went on air, I do sound a little bit like a chorus of bullfrogs because of nasty virus. So I apologize in advance if my voice just goes, but I know both of you will take the show. So anyway, welcome to both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I appreciate the fact that you also sent questions that will help guide me as I go through this. So I'm just going to begin, and I think Lisa, you're on the first speaking part of the program. But people watching this, it's what is home takeover? What's the definition of home takeover?
Yeah, for sure. So we'll start with the definition, and home takeover is when a vulnerable tenant, or it could be a homeowner, is forced to accommodate unwanted guests in their home. So the tenant or the homeowner may initially allow the unwanted guest or the perpetrator into their home to fulfill unmet social, economic, or personal needs. So in the process of allowing them into the home, the tenant or the homeowner could potentially be threatened physically, financially, or psychologically. When we talk about an unwanted guest or a perpetrator, it could be a relative, it could be a friend, it could be a friend of a friend, or just a general acquaintance. And in some situations, we know it could be an adult child who has come back home, or it could be a grandchild who has moved in and, again, taken over the home. So you can imagine how stressful this could be for a tenant or a homeowner when it is a family member who is involved in the takeover.
So there was a project that actually got started around home takeover. What was the spark that there was an issue? And can you describe the project, please?
For sure. So this has been a very exciting project that Public Health has been leading in partnership with Grey County Housing. The project started in November of 2021 when community partners formed an advisory committee consisting of housing organizations, mental health services, the police, fire, and many other services in our community. We came together to address the issue of home takeover collaboratively. So Public Health was hearing these stories shared by housing staff, and we really wanted to explore the opportunity to address the issue using a more collaborative approach, as we knew there were significant health impacts that were identified. So this advisory committee came together. We developed an action plan, and really the primary purpose of the project was to develop a home takeover response framework to really support individuals who were living in community housing, who were dealing with home takeovers. Sorry, Carol, I was just going to say a common question that I do get is how did we know in the first place? And maybe that's what you were going to ask me. How did we know that this was an issue? And it's a good question. Certainly, as I said, the impacts of home takeover for tenants, for families, the individuals taking over the unit, and even the neighbors were being observed by the housing staff, particularly at community housing neighborhoods. So although when we looked a little bit deeper into the issue, home takeovers have not been studied or quantified at the local level. But we knew that when we came together as an advisory committee, that many of our community partners were able to share anecdotes of home takeovers that were happening in our community, which really demonstrated to us that, you know, this is an issue that isn't only happening just at rental units or community housing neighborhoods, that is also an issue that's happening in homes that are owner occupied, you know, for homeowners. So we knew it was an issue happening in our community.
Now, the collaborative approach, the rationale for the collaborative approach rather than an individual organization, what sparked that?
Yeah, so we actually, when we brought all the community partners together, we did do a survey to find out more about what our partners knew about home takeover and what the current response was. And what we found was that service providers were familiar with the issue, but not so much the term home takeover. It had never been recognized as a term, but they knew that they were dealing with it in our community as an issue. So it was very apparent that service providers were working at the individual level as part of their services or part of their work, but that we needed a more collaborative approach in order to decrease the incidence and the impacts of home takeover.
So, Sharon, I know that Lisa has discussed the definition of home takeover, but I'm interested that in home takeover, there's actually two parties involved in a home takeover. I wonder if you can explain that and then talk about who's most at risk for a home takeover.
Certainly. So the two parts of a home takeover we call the perpetrator and the target. So the target would be the homeowner or the rightful occupant of the property, and then the person who is the perpetrator is the person who is, for whatever reason, taking over that property and assuming some level of control of the property. And really, I think we could argue that both parties, although we use the terms target and perpetrator, they're both coming with their own vulnerabilities, right? So that, and I think that speaks to the working together collaboratively, because, for example, if the police were to respond to a home takeover situation and remove the unwanted guests, it doesn't solve the problem of where those unwanted guests are supposed to go. And if you don't look at the problem as a holistic issue and you don't bring in as many supports that are required, then you're really not solving anything. And once the police leave, likely the perpetrator is just going to return. Mm-hmm. So you asked who is most susceptible? People with vulnerabilities. So vulnerabilities have presented and do present in so many different ways. COVID, I think, has perpetuated loneliness and isolation in seniors, for example, and in single individuals. We have single moms who are struggling to pay the bills, and with inflation, they may see, as Lisa had mentioned, oftentimes these start because there's some sort of level of benefit to the target. So that the target may see that there's going to be extra money or believe there's going to be extra money coming into the unit. A grandfather may see that their grandson is struggling with mental health and struggling to have their own housing, and out of a sense of love and nurturing for their grandson, bring that grandson in, not realizing that then the grandson's friends are going to come and they're going to lose that sense of control. There may also be addictions or mental health complications where sometimes we've seen that property is seen as a good place to sell illicit narcotics, and the target believes that this is going to provide easier access to a substance for which they have an addiction. But again, there's that turn of events where the unit is no longer in your control.
Right. As I read through the information that you both have provided, I was really interested in the emotional component when it involves family or close relationships. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit more about that and the fact that individual approaches don't necessarily fit all situations.
I'm sure you can appreciate that a response to the grandfather situation with the grandson, bringing his friends in who maybe are also experiencing a struggle in accessing housing would be a very different, softer approach than a situation where illicit activity is happening and, police might need to be involved in order to ensure that everything is done safely. So it really is a lot of it comes down to the willingness to participate in solving the problem as well from the target. And we've seen great response from situations where it is a family member, because at the end of the day, the family member often just wants their unit back, but they also want to see their loved one is cared for and supported. And so if you can meet those needs, then you're likely going to have a more successful outcome for both parties.
True. And that's helpful for me to understand, because otherwise there would be a lot of emotional overlay around, okay, if I don't provide this, what happens? But so why does this happen? I mean, you mentioned about COVID, but are there other factors that contribute to this issue?
So one of the major factors is the current housing market and the housing crisis. So the shortage of affordable housing, the shortage of housing stock, period, is definitely something that is contributing to the issue. Long wait lists for mental health supports or for addiction supports would be a possible issue. Inflation, costs are rising. Addiction could potentially drive somebody to be vulnerable and see a need that could be met. That they happen because there's a need that is felt by the target, and that need is somehow, they believe, going to be filled by the perpetrator, and that's why it's usually started as an amicable agreement, and then it goes sideways. So if we can work with people, if we can catch these and educate early on and help to fulfill or satisfy whatever that need was, then we have a chance of hopefully providing some sort of effective intervention, working collaboratively.
And that takes us back to the comments earlier that there are at least two in the groups or individuals that have needs, and that it's not just one, it could be two and or more, actually. And it certainly can impact family dynamics, I would think, for sure. So I'm most interested in knowing about the signs of a home takeover. How would a person even realize that there is a takeover that's happened?
We've noticed in our own experiences, and I'm feeling that it would probably translate in the community, because as Lisa mentioned, this is not, although it was first identified at a meeting with supports who work within community housing, it was very quickly discovered that this extends into our community as a whole. But I think that one of the when there's a situation with illicit activity, with drug activity, there tends to be noise complaints. There tends to be, problems with the neighbors, and you become an unpopular tenant, which of course the police might be getting called. There could be extra bylaw for noise concerns. There could be the landlord looking at eviction, and as a neighbor, you might be victim to having to live next door to that. In quieter situations where it's family, it could be not spending as much time at home. We've seen situations, for example, with that senior, the grandchild moves in, the grandchild has friends over, months go by or weeks go by, and the grandchild is quite comfortable in that apartment. And, the grandparent it's not an atmosphere where they feel comfortable being when there's groups of young adults hanging out together and living life the way they feel that they should live life. And so you might notice that your neighbor's not home as much. There may be a sense of secrecy around what's going on in the unit, particularly if you're in a rental and fearful of your landlord. You might avoid your landlord altogether. So if landlords are noticing that what used to be a reasonably quiet tenancy, now they're struggling, they're getting these complaints and they're struggling to reach their tenant, we would encourage you to look at these situations with a different lens and ask some questions. And Lisa's going to speak about where to find those resources later in the show. But in order to really ascertain, is this a home takeover? And we acknowledge that they're not all home takeovers. I'm sure there's going to be lots of conversation tonight because we know that there's lots of adults living at home with their parents, and their parents at the dinner table tonight are going to say, well, I'm a victim of a home takeover, and off you go. But that's not necessarily the case, right? It's got to have that element of loss of control of your unit and some risk to your safety.
There are also other signs that neighbors or others could watch for that have to do with health and wellness of individuals who may be having a takeover happen. Can you speak to those as well, please?
Absolutely. I mean, I know for myself, when I'm enduring some sort of stressor, it affects my weight. I may lose sleep, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that's out there. So if you're noticing a difference in how your neighbor is appearing, if you're noticing, that your neighbor is losing weight or showing other physical signs of stressors, nervousness, those types of things, those are certainly cues that we hope that as a society we'll reach out to our neighbors and just say, are you okay? I'm concerned about you. And I've noticed that you've got somebody there, and are you okay with that? Because did you know that there's resources?
So rather than being afraid to ask as a good neighbor, you're saying it's important to ask. Even
100%.
If people say, I'm fine, or they say, don't ask, or it's none of your business, it's still important as a community member to ask.
I think so. I think at the very least, it lets them know that there's somebody there that's concerned. And I think that if you can get the information out that, hey, there are supports if you need them, then that might spark the realization that people are not alone. Imagine being that senior who has been isolated for so long, and now you feel isolated in this situation, but then you hear that, no, there is actually some help that could potentially come and get you out of this.
So just before we head back to Lisa, I also read your comments about eviction, that eviction is a real risk to the homeowner. So maybe let's just talk about eviction, because underlined in your notes is eviction can be devastating, and it's actually to the vulnerable person. So.
Absolutely. If you are the victim of a home takeover and you have lots of noise complaints and other neighbors are concerned, then as a responsible landlord or property owner, there is a expectation to keep the building to a certain level for the other tenants, right? It's about respecting the rights of the many versus the rights of the individual. And as a landlord in Ontario, they have very little recourse other than to go through the procedures that are set out by the Residential Tenancy Act, which is to issue a notice of eviction. If you are the occupant or the target and you're not able to get things under control and resolve the issue, then you could be taken to a tribunal with the Landlord Tenant Board. And if the if your landlord is able to bring enough witnesses or bring enough evidence that this has become an out of control situation, then the adjudicator at the tribunal could terminate the tenancy. And I think we're all aware of what rental prices in our area are looking at, and it's not just here, it's across the country, right? This is not a problem that's localized. This is everywhere. So where do you go if you lose your home? We have seniors who have been renting the same home for 20 years and are paying an very unreasonable rent compared to what a landlord could charge now, and they would be devastated. And we have young people who are struggling with addiction and mental health who are on limited income sources. And where do they go when our rents are increasing? And you have to look at the big picture of, as the cost of housing goes up in terms of purchasing it, investors have to charge more for rent to accommodate those costs. So it's a never-ending circle for the tenant. So it's very important that intervention happens at an early stage so that somebody isn't having to find new housing and start over in a time where it's very unaffordable.
Thank you. Lisa, can you discuss a little more about what actually is happening to address the issue and the actual response framework?
Yeah, for sure. So the advisory committee, as I mentioned earlier, our primary purpose of the project was to develop a response framework. So the framework, as well as a response pathway, was developed to help build this community partner capacity to prevent, identify, respond to, and help recovery from a home takeover. So there's really those 4 key components in regards to responding to a home takeover. And as mentioned, the complexities that are associated with home takeover really does require good judgment from service providers in deciding that appropriate course of action. And every circumstance is very unique, as we know as well. So the pathway really helps service providers in that decision-making process when responding to a home takeover. And the framework really helps to define each of our roles as community partners in a home takeover situation. Certainly having a multi-sector approach will also help us to address or respond to a home takeover situation in regards to those social factors and all the interrelated factors that Sharon talked about, like mental health, addictions, housing. You know, we all have a part to play, but we need to come together and do that in a collaborative way. Yeah, and ultimately we want people to know that they're not alone and that they should feel safe in their home. So there's many partners involved with the project, and that includes 211. It is one of our partners, and certainly they're available to call or text for anyone who's looking for more information or just needs help in dealing with a home takeover situation.
So you had mentioned about keeping the spaces safe. So obviously there's education that happens across all of the partners that interface in this. What are some things that you would like to share about how people can keep their spaces safe, or what are the risks?
For sure. So prevention is key, and it's part of the framework. Home takeovers are best prevented when tenants or homeowners are aware of the risks and are provided education about how to keep their homes or their spaces safe. So in the framework, there's a number of examples of prevention strategies. So just to name a few, we talk about, having a discussion with the tenant prior to renting the unit, letting them know what home takeovers are, what they look like, and how to avoid them. So part of that safety planning discussion. Resistance training, so namely how to say no to someone who wants to come in. Certainly we encourage tenants to avoid letting one person stay because we did hear from people with lived experience. We did do some interviews as part of our project. And our key informant interviews said, it's a very slippery slope. And they found that once they let one person in, the word spreads and it's very easy to lose control. So another really good prevention strategy is to encourage tenants to not let anyone stay and acknowledge that perpetrators may be friends. They may be family, they may be friends of friends, as I said, acquaintances, and that can create a real challenge in terms of the relationship. And there's a fear there of losing friends. Yeah. So for more prevention strategies, certainly there's a lot presented in the framework, and prevention is that first part of home takeover, and hopefully moving forward we can prevent a lot of them from happening.
Now, I know we've got about 3 minutes left in the program, so lots of information, but as people are around the dinner table having conversations, Sharon, as you mentioned, where can they go to learn more, to get the resources, to start asking those questions? What would you suggest, and what's in there that you would think would be really helpful for them to look at?
Yeah, so there have been a lot of resources developed, and some of them were adapted. I'll give a shout out to Ottawa Crime Prevention. They had done a lot of work on home takeover, so we did get permission to use and adapt a lot of their resources. So on the Public Health Grey Bruce is the website where all of our resources for home takeover are shared, as well as the home takeover response framework and pathway, as well as a guidebook for organizations and service providers who want to have opportunities to educate other maybe colleagues or vulnerable tenants. So there is a guidebook for education available. But for anyone sitting around the table who might be questioning, a neighbor or a friend or someone who might be in a home takeover situation, we do have a really great tool that can be used. It's a checklist. It's called Welcomed Guest or Home Takeover, and it's a 10 questions are presented that people can go through and ask themselves, is this a welcome guest, or am I potentially in a home takeover situation? So it's a great one-pager. Even service providers can use it with their clients or their tenants, just to, again, open up the conversation, raise awareness, and make sure, people get the help that they need, that they're not alone if they're feeling unsafe in their home. So there are a lot of great resources out there for people, and they are available on our website.
So in the last minute or 30 seconds, next steps, where does the project go now?
Yeah, so the project is going to continue into 2023. There are several opportunities for organizations and service providers to take action. So certainly the service providers that have been part of our advisory committee are very much aware of those opportunities that are presented in the framework. And there's a full list of those actions highlighted in the framework that people can take a look. Moving forward with the committee, we will continue the process of bringing education and awareness to the forefront of local conversations and discussions like today. With the formal adoption and execution of the framework by organizations, we're hoping we can increase the capacity to prevent, identify, respond to, and reduce the incidence of home takeovers in a more collaborative way. So we will continue. We have an evaluation framework, and I'm sure you'll hear more about home takeover as the project continues.
I want to thank both of you for being here today. This has been so informative for me, and I am sure to our viewing audience. Bottom line, have the conversation, make the call to 211, go to the website and learn resources. Please come back again and fill us in more on your project. I would really welcome you both as guests again. Thank you to our viewing audience.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
Piper Post here with me for Knights. Tune in on Fridays at 5 to watch Knights hockey. Alessandro Supino here with Knights Hockey. Tune in to Rogers TV 5 o'clock on Friday for the game.
Join us for Scotiabank Hockey Day in Canada.
Come celebrate the roots of our game and the stories that bring it to life. It starts with the Scotiabank Show.